Today, I'm joined by Lynn Tatera, a researcher and educator known for her work on teaching self-compassion to young children. Her research looks at how the way we speak to and support children shapes their inner voice, and how developing self-compassion early on can influence mental health, emotional resilience, and even how we parent later on in life. Jamie, thank you for being here today. To start us off, can you tell us a bit about your work and what led you to focus on self-compassion in young children?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I'm grateful to be here with you. I was originally an elementary school educator.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I had my first daughter, she had a lot of sensory differences. And at that juncture, actually, I was into mindfulness as well.
Right.
And I had shifted to become a mindfulness teacher during her childhood. And yet, discovered it wasn't very effective for calming down her tantrums. Like if I tried to
Mhm.
have her take deep breaths, it was not productive. So I
Yeah.
actually stumbled into self-compassion through going to see a therapist myself.
Right.
And realizing, she said, I think you need self-compassion. Because I'm like, what am I doing wrong? Is this my childhood issues? And so once I found self-compassion, it was a really easy, an easy I don't know, reach or like next step to think about, because I'm an educator. How do I teach
Mhm.
kids and how do I teach teens? And so I do have my master's, and I am involved in research projects and I help to
Mhm.
publish papers, but my work is actually usually as the interventionist. And so I
Right.
am the one teaching kids and families self-compassion, because it's the resource that I never knew I needed. And
Mhm.
it's so transformed my relationship with myself, my ability to parent my daughter, that I thought the world needs more of this.
Mhm. So tell us exactly then, what is self-compassion and how does it show up in young children? Because how's it like different from self-esteem?
Right, right. So definitely very different than self-esteem. So self-esteem is, I feel good about myself because I am doing well, right?
Mhm.
I feel good about myself because I compare favorably to others, right? So we have self-esteem when we feel successful, and we
Yep.
lack self-esteem when we feel unsuccessful. But of course, when do we need self-esteem? It's when we're feeling unsuccessful. And so that's where self-compassion comes in. Because so self-compassion is really being a good, kind, supportive friend to ourselves when things go wrong.
Right.
And so that's when we need it most. It's a very stable sense of well-being because it has the wisdom in it to know that everybody struggles sometimes, that
Mhm.
it's human to have difficult emotions. And we give ourselves kindness not because we deserve it, but because we're a human being
Mhm.
and worthy of kindness innately, rather than having to achieve something in order to to merit it.
It's one of those things, isn't it, that we're often better at offering up to other people than we are giving it to ourselves. You know, if a friend or your partner comes in with a story, or sometimes my husband and I will actually speak about how we've parented the children. And if he's not kind of done his optimal parenting, I'm always really compassionate. And I say to him, like, it is really hard. You've had a long day. This has happened. Like, cut yourself some slack. You're human. The kids were being really annoying. You're doing your best. But when I think of myself, I struggle not to be harder on myself and have higher expectations, and to offer that same level of self-compassion just doesn't come as naturally.
Absolutely. And that's because of our, right? So it's our amygdala and our prefrontal cortex, right? So
Hmm.
our thinking part of our brain, when somebody we care about is struggling, we can show up with this thinking part of our brain because it's no threat to us. Their
Hmm.
struggle isn't a personal threat. But when we fall short, right? Like our amygdala, our alarm, our fear alarm will go off. And
Yeah.
so we'll have oftentimes a voice that's like that wants to stop it, because we want
Yeah.
to make sure that we're okay, that we belong. And so we're more likely to respond to ourselves with self-criticism than we are to someone else.
It's interesting, isn't it? So, how can we go about then learning to be more self compassionate to ourselves?
Right. Well, and I can answer that question. I also want to backtrack for a moment, because you did ask about how do we know when kids have it and when
Yeah.
kids don't, which I can broaden this too, to be like, how do we know when we have it and when we
Hmm.
don't, right? So we'll start with kids. So some early signs that your child is lacking in self-compassion, and again, you can extrapolate this to you. They don't want to try things that they don't know they'll be successful at. right? So
Right.
like really like a strong fear of failure, a struggle in owning mistakes, right?
Mhm.
Like they'll just explode when they make a mistake. And again, these are all indicators too of shame,
Mhm.
right? That I don't know that it's human to make mistakes. I don't know that struggling is part of the human experience, and I'm still worthy of kindness even while I struggle. Or if the child is a perfectionist, again, that we'd say perfectionism is actually, it's like a shame shield, right? So any of these would be indicators that a child is struggling with self-compassion and could use more. And similarly for us as adults, right? If we're really hard on ourselves, if we feel like we don't give ourselves any permission to fall short, these are, or if we don't want to try something because what if I get it wrong? These are all
Yeah.
indicators that we need the spaciousness of self-compassion so that we know that if I try something hard and I fail, I've got my back. I've got
Mhm.
my back. And so then
Okay.
the next question was, how do we grow it? Was that your question?
Yes. Yeah.
Right. So thankfully it's a trainable skill, right? Like thank you, thank you, thank you. Because some of us grow up and we didn't have it modeled in our homes.
Yeah.
And we didn't necessarily have caregivers speaking to us with this voice that we wanted to internalize because
Mhm.
caregivers didn't have the voice. So people can, train themselves to be more self-compassionate. So a simple way to do so would be to simply, if you have mastered the art, and again, we're all on the learning team, but of
Mhm.
being a good friend to others, to consider, what would I say to a friend who was having a similar struggle? And
Yeah.
remembering that kindness includes two aspects. And I have like all these stuffed animals because this is what I use when I teach. And so I have this little bunny stuffed animal here that has a cape and it's
Yeah. I
just
love that.
snuggles and super snuggles. So kindness includes really validating, being
Mhm.
with, right? So like being a good friend to others means that we're able to say, wow, that's really hard. I'm here, right?
Mhm.
Like just being supportive presence. But truthfully, and sometimes I feel like I lack this with my friends, sometimes self-compassion and being a good friend involves like owning up to mistakes. It involves doing the hard thing again. It involves reminding yourself this isn't going to last forever and you can
Mhm.
do hard things. And so really we want to have both that like gentle kindness and that strong kindness with our friends, depending on what they need. And we want to be able to do the same thing with ourselves.
Okay. So then talk me through, how do we apply that to our children? How do we like foster that in them?
Yes. So, and I also will say too, reading books, there's like the self-compassion workbook, right? The mindful self-compassion program, taking courses. So there's also, in addition to just how would I treat a friend, which sometimes is not as tangible as like actually studying something and
Mhm.
practicing something on purpose. And then I have a parent child class, right? Mindfulness and self-compassion for children and caregivers. Parents and kids can learn it together. So there is actually, it's very valuable
Yeah.
to study. Now, that being said, or even read books on the topic, right? Like all of these things are useful. So in order for us to help kids grow it, we have to have it ourselves, or we have to be learning it ourselves. So this is the big
Mhm.
relief. So any parents that are listening that are like, oh my gosh, I'm so hard on myself. Like I don't tolerate any mistakes. How am I going to help my kid become self-compassionate? Do you know
Mhm.
what? Learning how to, we talk about three elements of self-compassion. And so the first element, and again, I have my little animals here, right? So the first element is being mindful. It spots the giraffe, right?
Mhm.
So being able to even hold in your own awareness, wow, I'm really hard on myself. I don't give
Mhm.
myself a lot of leeway for making mistakes. And so this mindfulness is really a non-judgmental awareness. Or if we're having a difficult moment, being able to be mindful of the fact, wow, I'm really struggling right now. I'm
Mhm.
having a rough time. And this, two ways we sometimes miss the mark on this is one, we get all caught up in the storyline. And then this happened, and then they did that. And it's like, okay, human being struggling, right? Like
Yeah.
come back to the one who's having a rough time, or we minimize. It's fine, doesn't bother me, right? So
Yeah.
neither one of those are that mindfulness component. So learning to embrace where we are with mindful awareness and a recognition that human beings struggle, right? So
Mhm.
that's the second component, which is common humanity. And I use a little doggy here, Buddy, to remind ourselves that we're not alone. And
Yeah.
so, sometimes we give ourselves like the 1-2 punch, like life is being hard. And then we tell ourselves, why are you struggling?
Mhm.
Ouch, ouch, right? Like that's double
Yeah.
hard now. Now it's hard because it's hard. Now it's hard because I'm gaslighting myself. And so self compassion says, Everybody struggles sometimes as human. And then again, offering ourselves kindness. So if I'm growing that, and then I can model that for my kids.
Mm-hmm.
And so if I'm having a challenging moment, and I do tell parents, it's really important to not just model the successful strategy. Like the kids need a bridge. They need to
Yeah.
hear mommy, daddy, grandma, grandpa, whoever you are, right, is struggling. And so, but being able to hold it in a mindful awareness so that it's not a total dump on the child,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like I am having a really rough time right now. And maybe even if you're having this voice that's beating yourself up, just to be mindful of that. And I noticed a part of me is like criticizing myself because I'm struggling. And then being able to now model the resource. I know this happens to everyone sometimes. I know I'm a good person. I'm going to give myself a little hug because this is hard. And like a little, like you can do it, like with your arm, because I can do hard things. So that's what we can really do. That's one way we can help kids grow it is to model it, including the struggle.
It's so interesting because I feel like I'm speaking to so many people of all different areas with everything to do with parenting. And that's one message that seems to just come through time and time again, which is that really, if it's something we want to teach to our children, we've got to model it. And like you say, we don't have to have perfected it because that's actually not going to teach the lesson, but we have to be learning it. So as long as we've got the self-awareness and we're picking up on what we're struggling with, and so that we can start to make change. And then, like you say, voice that and model that to our children, that mummy is struggling today and I am finding this hard and my inner talk isn't particularly positive right now. What should I say if I was talking to a friend? And you can sometimes bring them in and they can give some examples and they can almost be the one to give you the pep talk because it kind of helps them learn the lesson. And it's incredible the power of that modeling. So it's so interesting to hear that that's the exact same way really that we need to be teaching self-compassion. And understanding, again, using self-compassion on ourselves, that it is part of the journey of parenthood and that we are learning as well as our children if we want to teach these things to our children.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And then the other piece of it, of course, is to be the voice we want kids to internalize. Yeah. Right. So there's like the research is super clear that secure attachment and self-compassion go hand in hand. Mm-hmm. Luckily, we can grow a secure attachment as a grown-up. If we didn't have it as a child, right, we can grow self-compassion and kind of have like what we call grown or earned attachment. But, when we're speaking to our children, to have that question, is this the voice that I want them to internalize? Mm-hmm. Which is like, again, sometimes super ouch, right? Like self-compassion, friend, self-compassion. And if we notice it's not. So, for example, in my own journey, I learned to be tender with myself before I became I'm a fierce self-compassion teacher too. So fierce as in motivating, protecting, providing, right? I learned that second. So before I learned fierce self-compassion, let's say I had a project to do. My voice might sound like, why are you not doing your project? You got to do this thing. You need to stop procrastinating, right? So it was like, again, not horrible words. I wasn't like cussing myself out, but you can hear in the tone that it's not real nice. And when my daughter had to do her homework, back when my 17-year-old was in 7th grade, right? And she would procrastinate. And I would hear myself using that exact same voice, right? Like, why are you not doing your homework? You need to do your homework. Like, close that browser. You know what I mean? Just like, rah. And then as I learned to change my own inner voice and say to myself, if I had to do a project, okay, you got to do this project, right? So again, some of the same words, but different tone. Like, what do you need to do to get started? Like, do you need to call a friend? Do we need to like go to the library? Like, what do you need? Like, how can I support you? This is my inner talk to get this done. And then once I had that, and I would hear myself using that opposite voice with my daughter when she had to do her homework, I'd say, you know what, Maya, this is not the voice I want you to internalize. Let me try again. You know what? You got to do your homework, sweetie. What do you need? Do you need to take a little break? Do you need to come sit next to me? Do you need a snack? Like, how can I support you? Because we both know it has to get done. But I seriously think I couldn't have accessed that way of relating to her until I had internalized it a little bit for me. So for any parents that just feel like, how in the world do I become the internal voice that the external voice that I want my child to internalize? I would really encourage you to build your own internal voice, to be that voice that you want to have internalized. And then it's more of a natural flow for it to flow out.
I find that incredibly powerful to think how we do become our children's internal voice. And I love the way you ended that in any parents wondering how we become our children's internal voice, because that's something I often think myself, I feel quite responsible for that. But like you say, sometimes there's a lot of pressure there, isn't it? And how do you go about becoming that positive voice? So to really focus on your own internal chatter first, so it feels a lot more natural as to the type of things that you say to them. And then again, I think it's really key what you said there about asking questions. I think that's a big thing that I've learned as well, is to ask questions. What is it that you need? How can I help? Rather than being that voice of sit down and do your homework right now, because nobody responds well to that. I don't respond well to that, so my kids aren't going to respond well to that. Whereas when you ask those questions and you feel supportive to them, they're going to be way more responsive anyway.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And recognizing too that everyone's brain is a little different. And I think sometimes parents that have brains that are like, so I can't relate to you, but if you're a parent that has like a really well integrated brain that like easily accomplishes tasks and is gentle with yourself, those parents sometimes struggle more to be like, what's up with my child? Like, why can't they get something done? Why are they? But for me, I struggle with executive functioning skills. And so it's great because when my kids struggle with executive functioning skills, I'm like, you know what? I still get this. Like, this is
Yeah.
so hard. You know what I mean? Like, it's so hard to wash the dish, but like, we can do this. You know what I mean? Like, do we need to listen to music? Can we fun it up? Or do we just stick the dish? Do we just, so again, because I get what it's like to struggle, I
Yeah.
can, because the kids want to feel seen, even in the ways that they struggle. And I think sometimes it's actually harder for parents that are just naturally more put together to understand, why is my kid struggling like that? And then maybe they want to read some memoirs by people or autobiographies by people that struggle in the same way, so that they can
Yeah.
help their child to understand, why is this so hard for you? And not because you're a defective human being, but
Hmm.
because this is your natural wiring and that's fine. And we're going to work with it.
Yeah. I think that's a really key point, actually, isn't it? Is that that's your natural wiring and we can work with it. So tell me then, what's the long-term impact of growing up with or without self-compassion?
Mm. So, and this is partly too what got me into the field of self-compassion. So when I was a child, right, I did not grow up with self-compassion. Although again, there
Mhm.
was some wonderful things about the ways my parents parented me, including the fact we had a forest in our backyard. Like, thank you, parents, for like letting me go outside and play all the time. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
really good for the psyche. But nobody taught me how to handle difficult emotions. I had a dad who was an engineer who like put emotions in a box. And I had a
Hmm.
mom whose emotions were like everywhere. Like, we were all feeling them, right? So I didn't know how to like be mindful of, remind myself I'm not alone, and be kind to myself during my moments of struggle. And so I
Hmm.
developed addiction issues in my teens, right?
Wow.
Because I had pain and I didn't know how to respond to my pain. So
Hmm.
when kids do not have the resources to deal with pain, it's going to pop up in unhealthy ways, whether
Yeah.
that would be addiction issues or like hyperachievement and like anxiety issues, right? It's going to come out in some way that's not skillful because they don't have a skillful way to process things. So
Hmm.
that would be like a negative outcome that can come from not having. And of course, when we do have, it's so amazing, right? So
Hmm.
I can see this with my own children. And when my older daughter has dyslexia, she's also, we're all in our house, we call it ADHD-ish,
Yeah.
right? Like, nobody has a diagnosis because we've never, well, actually, I think maybe one had one at one point. But anyways, regardless, we're ADHD-ish. And where am I going with this? Oh, we know we do. Okay. Case in point, we know we struggle in some ways, and we know we're amazing people.
Hmm.
And we know that even our neurodiversity is a gift in some contexts.
Yeah.
So when a person grows up with self-compassion, I mean, the sky's the limit,
Hmm.
because they, because they have, like, actually what they have is they have real humility. And
Hmm.
sometimes humility gets a bad rap. Like, people think humility is like thinking you're like, a piece of poop on the floor. That's not humility. That's not seeing yourself clearly. Seeing yourself clearly is, I have beautiful strengths and I have ways that I struggle. And I
Yeah.
don't need to feel ashamed of being me. And when
Yeah.
you really have it, I mean, you can own it. You can take healthy risks. You can, tackle hard challenges that are going to help you to be your best selves. And you can have great relationships because you're not trying to one up other people. you
Hmm.
are a friend among friends. Anyways, it gives me goosebumps because that resource of self-compassion is such a solid sense of well-being that it
Hmm.
just creates the foundation for a really beautiful life.
It's a really lovely way that you've put that, actually, because my eldest son is dyslexic and has dyspraxia. My husband's got ADHD and I've got dyslexia. So we're well aware of the kind of neurodiverse traits you're talking about. And yeah, I see a lot of ADHD traits, to be fair, in all of us. So I can I love your term though. I've never heard that, but I might start using that in my household too. But I think that's a really great way of putting it about having I'd never really looked at it that maybe it is self-compassion towards myself and trying to develop that in my son as well, that about knowing our strengths and our weaknesses. Obviously we have some weaknesses with the dyslexia and some things that we find more challenging, but we also have other strengths in other areas, perhaps a little more creative or slightly different ways of thinking that can benefit us in other ways. So it's really kind of keeping the level balance of that, isn't it? Of understanding the two things. You can have struggles, but you can also still have strengths.
Right. And also what we attribute it to. So I have a set of workbooks for kids, the mindfulness and self-compassion workbook for kids, volumes 1 and volumes 2. And in
Mm-hmm.
volume 2, in I think it's like the 6th or the 7th adventure, it's the 6th. We talk about how everyone has strengths and weaknesses. And there's actually, and I have 11 kids, real kids in that book. From really different backgrounds, which is so awesome. I have some kids that hide feelings, some kids that explode with feelings. So every child can see themselves. And there's that adventure where the kids are talking about how we all have strengths and weaknesses. My daughter, she's one of the children in the book. She was 14 when we got all the quotes down. She talks about how, less than thinking would be, I have dyslexia and I hate myself. Right? And who hasn't, by the way, people that have ways that they struggle, will recognize this thought, right? Because you can
Yeah.
feel such pain. So she's like, that's a less than thought. And then she has a little thought cloud showing an equal to thought, which is, I have dyslexia and everybody struggles with something.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So it's not even like we're taking our strengths and our weaknesses and putting on a balance and being like, okay, I still have value because I have enough strengths relative. No, my weaknesses are human. And it's human to have strengths. And I am a valuable human being because I am. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where, again, self-compassion is so different than self-esteem, because it's
Mm-hmm.
really, we all have struggles in some ways. And my struggles do not make me less than, they make me equal to.
How does self-compassion, how does it, or the lack of it, I should say, show up then in women, mothers in particular, who would often describe themselves as perfectionists? They can often be known for particularly people that are lacking in self-compassion, really.
Right. Yeah. So that's exactly how it shows up, because you think, so there's recovering perfectionists, of which I am.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's I'm actively perfectionistic and I don't have another framework for reinterpreting things. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And that is an indicator of, I don't yet have the resource of self-compassion. Right.
Mm-hmm.
That is an actual indicator of it, because self-compassion means when I make a mistake, I'm still a good person.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So it's absolutely, if we feel like we don't give ourselves any permission to make a mistake, again, that's what we talked about earlier. We're actually having some shame issues, which is so funny because people would never think they're having shame issues because they oftentimes present as so perfect. But there's this fear that if
Yeah.
people knew I wasn't perfect, that
Mm-hmm.
my value would decrease. I wouldn't belong in the same way. I wouldn't be loved. And again, we're not necessarily so deep always to think I wouldn't be loved, but there's some
Mm-hmm.
kind of a fear that it's not
Yeah.
safe. Right. And so yeah, that perfectionism is absolutely like a signpost, if you will, that I need self-compassion.
Mm-hmm.
And again, the beautiful thing about self-compassion, I love it. I say it's like a blanket you throw over wherever you are.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So if you're in that place of of perfectionism, then to be able to be mindful of it. Right? I'm struggling with accepting that I make mistakes sometimes, or even giving myself permission to be imperfect, right? And then actually bringing in some common humanity. I'm
Mm-hmm.
not the only person that struggles with perfectionism. So now you don't need to beat yourself up because you're a perfectionist, right? And in the beginning, when we're learning self-compassion, that's so common. The people that have a strong inner critic are like, now I'm not even good enough at being self-compassionate, right? Like, so no, like, everybody struggles with something. And so you're struggling with permission to let yourself be an imperfect human being. And then again, kindness, because it's hard to be trapped in perfectionism, and also super snuggles, you can learn to give yourself a little bit more space for being imperfect. You can do it. I believe in you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so how do you think this comes about? Is this often learnt behaviour then from how we were spoken to in childhood? If we didn't learn self-compassion when we were children, if that's not our internal voice, is that something we carry through into adulthood? So how do we enter in becoming, as you put it, a recovering perfectionist?
Right. So there's the nature and there's the nurture, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like, for example, my younger daughter was born. Oh my gosh, she's so fierce. And she had this like crazy inner critic. Like she just like from the cradle, I swear, like that was a child where did not want to make any mistakes. You know what I mean? Like would not try things that were like, I'm just like, I was a self-compassion teacher already, right? But I was like, I could not own her mistakes, right? But also really, 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 really fierce. Like just, like again, like she would get angry, but also like just so strong about issues. And I really
Mm-hmm.
wanted, I really have this belief, whatever the child's natural temperament is, there are gifts. Right. So
Mm-hmm.
I really wanted to preserve her fierceness. I tell her sometimes, like, you're going to someday be like a lawyer that's like protecting like the underdog because you're so fierce. So anyway, so there can be a nature component. Some people are just wired more self-critical, more perfectionistic. It can also be a nurture thing. So now if you looked at my daughter, she's now 13. She's a lot more humble, right?
Mm-hmm.
She's able to make mistakes. She can stick with things when they're hard. She understands everyone has, so we can absolutely educate ourselves into being a self-compassionate person. And sometimes our environment can do the opposite, right? So
Mm-hmm.
someone actually might be born in a way where they're not a perfectionist, but they feel like in their environment, it's not safe to make mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
Or somebody in their environment is having so much emotional baggage that they think, oh my gosh, I better be perfect to like counterbalance whatever is going on. And so really the causes I think can be multiple, but the solution is one, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is to really embrace ourselves with that compassionate voice so that we can feel safer being human.
God, that's so interesting. So, okay, so we've covered lots of areas then about how it affects us in our childhood, how it comes out in our motherhood, our adulthood, and how our inner voice plays a part in that, and how we can look at changing our inner voice and our inner critic. How some people are born with it, more nature nurture. So, with everything we've spoken about today, do you have any final words of advice for the listeners today when it comes to raising self-compassionate children?
Well, one is it definitely is good to have resources. So like even books, things of this nature, watching little videos. Like it's helpful to have, especially if you want kids to grow it. Kids sometimes don't want their parents to be their teacher.
Yeah.
So oftentimes the parents, their job is to model, to be the voice, but like find resources that are fun, like and my workbooks for kids, right? Like find
Yeah.
resources that kids will take in. Um, Also just recognize that it's messy and it's a long-term project. Like
Mhm.
whenever my kids are struggling with something, I just think, okay, like optimally by age 24, right when their brain is finished developing, like
Mhm.
they'll have mastered this. So like not getting so it can be really hard when we see our child being hard on themselves, right? It
Mhm.
can be really hard to just have a long-term view that actually what I want to do right now is them being hard on themselves. I want to cloak this in a spacious awareness. Wow,
Mhm.
you're being really hard on yourself. It must be difficult to have such a challenging voice in your head. Right now, you're being the one that's holding it all. So that's one thing I'd really encourage is whatever's going on with your kid, long-term view, grow your own resources with mindfulness and self-compassion so you can hold their development in spacious awareness. And then be so kind to yourself.
Mhm.
Parenting is so messy. It's so
Yeah.
messy. I'm like, we are imperfect parents, we have imperfect kids, and that's really beautiful. That's
Mhm.
by design. And so letting go of this idea that it's supposed to look a certain way, right? And
Mhm.
just letting yourself be fully human is one of the best gifts that you can give your child.
I love that. That is just the most beautiful advice, I think, to end on there. That firstly, it does take time, and accepting that just because you've modeled it once or tried to teach the lesson once doesn't mean that they're going to learn from there. It does take time and it does take practice. And to apply that same self-compassion and talk to ourselves, really, that it's going to take time and self-awareness and practice. And like you say, we are all beautifully human and therefore imperfect. And I think that's something I'm definitely learning and trying to embrace more in motherhood, is that I am fully full of mistakes and fault, but I am learning, and in learning and embracing that, I am teaching my children how to learn and embrace that too, which is a valuable lesson to them. So thank
Absolutely.
you, Jamie, for such wonderful advice there. You speak so passionately, so competently about your topic. I can see how you have studied that for so long, because that clearly comes across. So I feel like this podcast is going to be really, really beneficial to anybody out there struggling with perfectionism or looking to teach self-compassion to their children. So thank you for joining me today.